Suspended CEO of Cambridge Analytica, Alexander Nix, has pulled out of a hearing with Parliament, and that's according to the BBC News. Now, he was scheduled to appear before the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport tomorrow. Nix says it's because that he's under investigation by the Information Commissioner's office, and the committee's chairman says that's really not a good excuse. The committee is considering a formal summons for a later date. And it comes as Brittany Kaiser, a former employee of Cambridge Analytica, says the data scandal involving Facebook is bigger than previously thought. She spoke to members of Parliament in London today and discussed how the company used the data to influence the vote on Brexit and the 2016 U.S. presidential election. In a statement to Parliament, Kaiser wrote, "I believe it is almost certain that the number of Facebook users whose data was compromised through routes similar to that used by Kogan is much greater than 87 million. BBC media editor Amal Rajam is in London. So first question, we learned through Kaiser's statement that she believes much more than 87 million Facebook users were affected by the Cambridge Analytica scandal. How do you suppose Facebook is going to react to this news?
I think Facebook, Anne-Marie, will be absolutely horrified by this. It's worth saying that Brittany Kaiser has made that claim that many more than 87 million were affected in her written statement, and so far in her live testimony she hasn't yet produced any evidence to back it up. It's worth saying that the 87 million figure was itself one that Facebook put out, having started out with a much lower figure, around 50 million. And I think what they've tried to do is contain the damage from this scandal, which obviously affected their share price in a big way. So the claim that there's more than 87 million is going to horrify them and be one that I think they'll resist. But they have got a bit of wiggle room here, because Mark Zuckerberg has said repeatedly that Facebook are going to do a full audit of all the apps that allowed app developers to get hold of people's data. So he's going to, I imagine he's going to say it's possible that there were more affected. But Facebook went through a lot of pain to get to 87 million, so the claim that there's even more than 87 million is going to hurt, I think.
What else do you think are the big takeaways from her statement?
Well, there's a really extraordinary accusation in there about the Brexit referendum, which the central question about Cambridge Analytica throughout our coverage of this story has been, was there an influence by this company, which boasted about its involvement in the Trump campaign, in the decision by the British people to leave the European Union? And there seems to be a new piece of information, which is that Aaron Banks, a key figure in one of the Leave campaigns, Leave.eu, also runs insurance companies. And what Brittany Kaiser said today is that when she visited the offices of Aaron Banks, he was using staff from his insurance companies to do research and using their data from the insurance companies to do work on the Leave campaign. Now, if that was the case, that would be an improper use of staff. It hadn't been declared, it wasn't transparent, and that has big implications and would strengthen the claim made by lots and lots of opponents of Britain's decision that actually it was done through sort of dirty practices. It's worth saying Aaron Banks, who's very prolific on Twitter, is yet to respond. I imagine he'll deny that allegation, but it's certainly one that the authorities will look into in some considerable detail.
So then, at this point, based on what we've heard so far and based on her written statement, does it rise to the level where you think a Parliament may want to get involved here? I
think there is definitely a very, very strong mood across Britain that a lot of these big technology companies, and Facebook in particular, have been unregulated for too long. Obviously, they are bound by some regulations and bound by some laws, but there is a growing feeling that it shouldn't just be up to Europe with its new data protection regulation, or Washington, which gave Mark Zuckerberg a tough time last week, but it might also be up to British lawmakers to move in a much more aggressive direction to clip the wings of Facebook. That's certainly the mood music over here. The trouble is that there's always a big gap between what politicians in Britain say should happen and what ends up actually happening, and that's because regulation of these companies is very, very hard to do. The old models of regulation as applied to, for instance, broadcast media like the BBC, where I'm speaking from, just don't apply when it comes to technology companies. And the volume of data and content that these companies host make them much, much harder to control. So while there is a general mood, a lot of chatter about the fact that we may need new laws and may need new regulation, actually devising those laws and putting that regulation in place and making them work effectively is a long way off yet.
Yeah, I know. I often think of it as, trying to fix a vehicle as it's barreling down a highway. I mean, not only it seems as if with this sort of testimony, we're sort of looking back, but in the meanwhile, the technology is moving forward, and we really don't know how some of the stuff that's being developed now will be used in the future.
I think that's a very important point that you make, because the technology companies have often argued that one of the problems with regulation is that it's ossified in the moment. That the rate of change, of innovation in these big tech companies is so fast that it will be wrong to regulate, because the regulation will immediately be overtaken by technology. I think there's also a separate issue, which is a clash of worldviews between some of these Silicon Valley and West Coast companies and European regulators. My experience of talking to these companies is they believe very strongly that social problems have technological solutions. Regulators in Europe, increasingly in Britain, maybe perhaps in Washington as well, that you know better than I do, increasingly seem to believe that if there are social problems, they need regulatory solutions. And the tech companies keep saying, don't worry, we'll come up with new technology, we'll come up with new tools to clamp down on these problems. I think there's a mood that's growing here that says, actually, that's not good enough. You've had too much of a free ride for too long. You've had, in Facebook's case, 14 years where you've made a huge amount of money. It's time you took your social responsibilities a little bit more seriously. But as I say, turning that into effective legislation and regulation when the technology is changing so fast, as you hint at, is very, very hard to do.
Right. You know, I'm curious, what the testimony has been like on your side of the pond. When Mark Zuckerberg testified in front of lawmakers here, there was a feeling that lawmakers weren't quite in touch with what Facebook was, how the technology worked, and what exactly happened with our personal data. What's the feeling like there?
Well, I have to say I watched it from here and I was dismayed at some of the quality of the questioning, or rather the lack of quality of questioning. For one thing, I was taken aback really by the fact that for perhaps admirable non-partisan reasons, lawmakers were given either 5 or 4 minutes. Now, I understand why that might be the case. You've got lots of people who've got questions, but within that 4 or 5 minutes, it was very difficult to really pin Zuckerberg down on particular issues. There was also a number of lawmakers who clearly just didn't really understand how Facebook works and expended quite a lot of their own time with meandering questions that really they should have known the answers to. So I was disappointed by it, and I think the difficult thing to say is perhaps there was something of a generation gap where Zuckerberg, I mean, it's one of the curiosities about this sector is that Zuckerberg himself is 33 and some of the people interrogating him more than twice his age. So that was something that struck me, and I found it slightly disappointing, frankly, that the quality of the interrogation wasn't better last week. It's worth saying that in Britain there has been some very high caliber interrogation. Just in the committee that we're seeing today, we've got a couple of former lawyers. The chair of the committee, Damon Collins, is a man who used to work in advertising and knows quite a lot about the sector. So I think there's a hope that in Britain the MPs can obtain a standard of interrogation and pursue, because they don't have the same time limits, pursue lines of inquiry in a way some of their American counterparts last week simply could not.
All right, Amal Rajan from the BBC, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Well, coming up.